So let's start. Maybe other people will join us in a few minutes. So good evening to everyone, to the present and those who have expected to be present. Let me introduce myself. I'm Paul Dembinski, the director of the Observatoire de la Finance in Geneva, and also with Mrs. Kamerlingh, co-chair of the Global Jury of Ethics in Finance Prize. So let's start with a warm welcome to those for whom this ceremony is targeted. And I think I welcome especially the laureates, so maybe you could stand up, and we welcome you. There is also a warm welcome to His Excellency Mr. Giancarlo Kessler, the permanent representative of Switzerland to the OECD, to Mrs. Agnieszka Wicha, who is representing the Polish Bank Association, our partner for the Lodionar Polish chapter, to Mr. René Desbiold from Center of the Formation pour la Profession Bancaire here in Paris, who is our partner for the Francophone Prize. And I would like also to welcome the representative of our strategic partners, of the prize strategic partners, starting with OECD, which allows us to have this wonderful ceremony here. And from the CFA Institute, Gesina Kamerlingh, you will see her in a few minutes in her active role of moderating the roundtable. The representative of Euroclear, Stéphane Bernard, and his group, and Martin Gregson, who is, yes, you are here. Thank you very much. Peter Ware from SWIFT and SWIFT Institute, thank you very much for being with us. It is an honor to be here in this auditorium. It is a place in Paris, but it is also, and maybe above all, a place in the global economy, which is very important. We are honored by the interest that OECD has in our work and to the willingness to support our efforts to help finance to become to serve better the needs of the economy and of the society. The Secretary General of OECD will join around 7 o'clock to deliver his keynote speech. And without waiting for his presence, I would like once again to ask Mrs. Mathilde Ménard to carry our thanks to him and to the institution for all the efforts and commitment to this cause of better finance for a better world. As mentioned 2 minutes ago, we are here today to prize the laureates. But through this 5 or 6 laureates that we are going to see on the stage, we prize also the effort of about 100 young people who in different parts of the world either wrote something for the prize or committed to write something but not necessarily deliver. So there is an interest, there is a concern, there are ideas, and we are happy as a prize to be able to catalyze some of this idea and push them forward. The jury has selected 4 papers. You are going to hear more about it. But these papers are just the tip of an iceberg of many, many papers that we have received and hope to keep receiving in the next editions. So 2 years, almost 2 years from the last closing ceremony, which is also took Paris here to take place also here in Paris at the Banque de France. At the magnificent headquarters of this institution. But 2 years for a small institution like ours is a long time, and we have tried to work hard to develop the prize, to make it more visible, and also to get better to the people that could be interested in submitting essays, both in the professional world and in academia. So we have been in these 2 years through the 6th and 7th prize of the Polish chapter, and you will see some elements of it here with the Polish Bank Association as main partner. We have been through the first prize of the Francophone chapter with the Centre de Formation à la Profession Bancaire and René Desbiold. We have been in the starting block for a German speaking prize, which almost started but did not really deliver many papers in this first edition. And our partner in the German-speaking world is the Weltethos Institute from the Tübingen University. We managed to publish a book of 3 editions of essays that you will be receiving the advertisement of it in a few minutes. I would like to extend also the welcome to the jury members. I thank them for all the work that they have invested in this endeavor. And I will also take the opportunity to set some targets for, or at least maybe projects for the edition 2020. First of all, as the prize is running every second year, so we are closing now the 18-19s, the 2021 is supposed to start in early spring, but we hope to have two things happening during this period. First, have a summer school, a seminar with those who were nominated to the previous editions, and we work very much on the network of these people. We would like also to develop an online training or modules for online training in the theme of ethics and trust in finance, and drawing on the multicultural and multi-geographical, let's say, exposure of many of our authors. And we hope also to put back on track the Ibero-American chapter that used to take place in previous editions of the prize. So the small group and small team would not have achieved all this, what I said in 2 minutes ago, without a very dedicated spirit of cooperation. And I would like to thank, in the first place, our nearest collaborators, Anna Soisson. Where is Anna? She's working probably. She's here. So thank you very much, Anna. I would like also to thank Virgile Perret, who joined the team in the mid of the prize. Virgile, where are you? Who is not here? Where is he? Yes, you are here, back there. Yes, in the surveillance department. And Nati Garcia, who is working from Spain remotely. But if this team, the commitment of the team would not make it if we'd not had strategic partners. Strategic partners who are not only providing funding, but also are supporting the idea and spreading the idea and connecting the networks and pushing the idea of ethics in finance through the different constituencies. I already mentioned OECD as a strategic and immaterial partner, but very important on the global scale. I mentioned through Mrs. Gesina Kamerlingh the CFA Institute, who was the first to come as strategic partner on board, the Euroclear Group with Stéphane Bernard, who is not here yet, and the SWIFT company and the SWIFT Institute with Peter Ware, who is here with us. Thank you very much for your support. We had this opportunity also, thanks to SWIFT, to have a present at Sibos in September, where our laureates, some of them were nominees, not laureates, were able to present very short speeches on the thesis, on their issues that they were addressing in their paper. So let's come back to the present, to achievements of the 7th edition. The jury final selection operated in 3 steps. It was a lot of reading and a lot of work, and I stress we were working in total anonymity, so we have no idea, except Hannah, no idea who is who and which papers belong to which nationality, which world, academic or professional. So we are totally blank on this. The jury, after these 3 iterations, met in September in Brussels, and we had about half of the jury members that contributed to this meeting. We were working at that time on the group of 11 nominated papers, which are all printed in the brochure that you're going to get when we leave this room. I think what is still, and it's every edition the same, 50% of the papers come from the professional world, 50% are coming from the academia. And I think this is one of the important characteristics of this prize. It's not a doctoral dissertation prize, it's not a master thesis prize, it is a prize for good ideas and clearly articulated reasoning. But if you run through these 11 papers that you will get in a few minutes in your hands, you will see also where is the preoccupation of the young generations. And I will just stress maybe three key ideas. So the first is the difficult but necessary dialogue between people coming from a technical background with those that are coming from a humanistic and maybe ethical background. And the place where this dialogue is expected to take place, is needed, is the financial world, broadly understood, including also the accounting world. So this is the first key ideas, and we will have one or two papers on these issues, on this issue. The second important question is the limits or the mode d'emploi, the best way to apply and to use the instrument of ethical charters and codes. Authors stress that it's important to have this kind of instruments, but it's not enough to have these kinds of instruments. So it's only by working the talk and working with the staff, we're working with the organization, that an enhanced quality of ethical behavior can emerge when the sense of responsibility and understanding of one and the others are doing is spread across the organization. The capability and the capacity of the people in the organization to spot the ethical dilemmas and to identify the right tools to solve them, or at least to clarify them. Never solve, but clarify them. The third important point, which you will find in many of the papers, is the fact that the ethics is not only about persons, but it's also about structures. And the structures in interaction with individual behavior may either work as enhancers of ethical behaviors, as enablers of that kind of behavior, or as preventers. And it's very important not only to speak about the spirit of the people, but also to to address the issue of culture of these organizations. So it is very important to keep in mind these three items. We'll come back to them in the presentation of some of the papers in a few minutes. This is the present, let's say, ranking of concerns of the young generation that is looking at how to promote and where to promote ethics and trust in finance. So before leaving the room and the place for the roundtable, I would like just to thank all of you and also invite, without giving a precise date, for a summer seminar when we would like to get the previous winners together and maybe set the ground for something bigger, which could be virtual academia for economic and finance serving the common good. So thank you very much, and I call now on Gesina Kamerlingh to come here on the stage and to introduce the panelists of this afternoon conversation.
So it's really wonderful to be here again. And it's wonderful to see these young faces, people who believe in something. I think that's what we badly need in society, people who believe and who act on values. I was listening to a radio program this morning, and it was a classical radio program. They were talking about a concert for Maria Callas. I said, well, she's dead, but it was her hologram. I thought, where have we got to that we listen to classical music with a hologram? And that really is, to me, worrying. And it is because of that I joined CFA Institute. It's because I passionately believe that we need to redress society, that we need to refocus finance, that we need to connect the dots again. And I was really inspired all these years that I've worked on the prize, and it's been an honor to have become the co-president together with Paul, to read all these young people writing and seeing that they want to connect the dots. Of course, we all know Greta Thunberg, and we see all these manifestations, and sometimes you hear, well, why are they doing it? I'm glad they do it. I'm glad people stand up and say something is wrong. I'm glad, because my daughter says to me, Mommy, you talk, but are you doing something? Well, I think talking also is doing something, but I can understand her point of view. And it struck me because 10 years ago, we had the financial crisis, 11 years now. And last autumn, there was a letter from the Vatican which really said, j'accuse. 10 years, you have done nothing. It's the same. And I agree. I look at my erstwhile colleagues in finance. I look at where new scandals come out on tax issues, on mis-selling. And I think, what have we done that we still haven't managed to do this? And it's been a real pleasure to discuss with the jury, to discuss with the partners, with really a view that we want to better. We want to better things. And I think that that's been an inspiration. So this roundtable, we will inspire you, hopefully. And I really look forward to it. So let me, without further ado, introduce the panelists. I'm going to start with Mathilde. You are a Deputy Director for Financial and Enterprise Affairs at the OECD. You cover financial markets. You're looking at international investment, corporate governance, anti-corruption, and previously you were also coordinator of the New Approaches to Economic Challenges initiative and senior advisor to the OECD Secretary General. And you launched an OECD-wide project on integrity and anti-corruption. And I have known you as a very forthright lady who doesn't hesitate to say what needs to be said. So great to have you on board. So now let me go to Pascal Cescon. And Pascal is Chief Ethics Officer of the Banque de France, reporting to the governor. He's in charge of designing and controlling internal ethics rules, promoting ethics awareness and culture, advising the governor, the managers and the staff. And he represents the Banque de France in Ethics and Compliances Office's task force of central banks and supervisory authorities of the Eurosystem. He has a long experience, and I've really appreciated discussing with you in our jury meetings. That's been really great. Now, let me turn to Dr. Eelco Fiole. And Eelco is a fellow Dutch national, so it's a great pleasure to have two Dutch people tonight. That's great. And as you know, or maybe you don't know, Dutch people don't hesitate to say what they think. Not always very welcome, but they do say it. But I speak mostly about myself because Eelco is much more diplomatic than I am. Eelco is co-founder and sole managing partner of Alpha Governance Partners in Zurich, the international partnership providing high-end risk-focused professional fiduciaries to financial institutions dealing with complex assets. Eelco is also an adjunct professor in finance ethics at HEC Lausanne for the MSc in Finance and M in Law and Economics programs, and has almost 25 years in finance. So he has a lot more on his CV, which I'm not going to talk. But let me say, he's also a CFA charter holder and is very involved in the annual conference. And he's actually going to speak at this next year's annual conference on ethics. So that's great. And then, last but not least, let me call upon Adam McLean. Adam McLean qualified as a Scottish lawyer in 2012 before moving to Brussels to work with the European institutions. And I'm glad to have people from the UK moving to Brussels. It's always a pleasure. No more said about this. He joined the Euroclear compliance team in 2016 on anti-money laundering and know your customer official after a short stint building on in-depth knowledge of Euroclear's business with the debt restructuring insolvency team. And those are key issues where ethics is really at the core. He's now working as a senior AML and sanctions regulatory advisor. And I think, it's very interesting because you've really got a panel of different focuses on ethics. And so in order to kick off this roundtable, because we're all so different, I thought it was very interesting to get them to give their perspective in 4 minutes, more or less, 5. I'm not going to count the seconds, on what your impressions were when you read the essays. What struck you? What were the major points from your perspective? Because you're all quite different. What struck you? So I'm going to start here with Ilko.
Thanks, Gesina. So I tend to say that professionals in this business have a pre-2008 and a post-2008 professional life. I used to work in London at the time, and that crisis sort of created, set the tone for my further career after that. What I found in the papers is that younger people who are writing about ethics actually very often are, I say that, they base themselves on what they have experienced or what they've seen in '08, and they get motivated by what happened in '08. And I find that very encouraging, because 10 years ago is not a long time, but many people actually did forget what happened in '08. It goes all the way into, when I went through the papers, into even some emotions that people expressed in their papers, all the way into tool development, I think, as Paul has mentioned as well. So I was very encouraged seeing that, and we had a discussion in Brussels around these things, about how relevant is one paper for another jurisdiction. There's even, in my mind, food in there, or material in there, which is sort of a universal language, universal value for other jurisdictions as well. So that's in a nutshell, what I've seen in all those papers. Thank you.
Great. Mathilde.
Me, what I've seen is first that there is effectively a very strong call from the youth people. And I think we are talking a lot here at the OECD and in our specific directorate about the pressure from the crowd to enhance trust in business, to work on anti-corruption issues, to work on responsible business conduct, etc. So here, very clear to see all these young people drafting very smartly about corruption issues or ethics issues in the finance sector. It was very inspiring. And what struck me is that it's really, all the essays I've been reading are giving me kind of my program of work for the next 2 to 5 years, in terms of topics. And for me, Paul has mentioned 3 main topics, but for me there are 5 topics that I've learned about, or it's all around. The first one is around education, with this issue of having bilingual people, like engineers, STEMs people, coupled with people with more like humanities background. So it's a very strong message. The second, of course, it's more like traditional, all around setting the right incentive, and that's it. I think that's what the regulators and the supervisors have tried to do in the last 10 years. You can discuss whether they have gone far enough or not, and whether this has been implemented, enforced or not. Probably not enough. Here we have always a type of discussion, the glass half empty or half full. So there has been a lot of discussions on this area. But the third one that I think is, for me, more interesting and looking forward, is all this discussion around culture. Because after all these changes in the regulation, all that the supervisors have tried to do, still we have regularly big scandals and misconduct in the financial industry. So there seems to be a systemic issue that is a toxic culture in this industry. And so there's a couple of issues that were around the culture and how do you fix the culture. And I found it quite interesting. And that's really what we are also trying to do now. We have a project that is called Trust in Business, and where we have a specific project that is trust beyond compliance. So that's really what do you do to fix the cultural issue in the financing industry, and I found it super interesting. And then the fourth thing is more like, for me, looking forward, it's one essay that was like vote with your wallet. So all the issue of how the financial industry is doing due diligence where they are investing. And we are doing a lot of work on that also, and maybe I will go back to that. But it's, for me, kind of the next frontier. It's not only looking at, I would say, okay, the conduct within the financial industry, but how can you, as a financial industry, influence the conduct of the companies you're investing in one way or the other through due diligence. So that's something. I think there was a couple of issues, at least one on this one. And last, I learned something I didn't know anything about about Islamic finance. So it was very interesting and a discovery for me. Thank you.
Very enriching, and I would agree. I think it was particularly enriching, and I think also having been a jury member for more than one session is to see also the changing and also reflecting the mood of finance, but also where the future is going to. So I think that was very much on the pulse.
I forgot something, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
There were also a number of very interesting essays, of course, around digital. Risks and opportunities of digital. So I think this gives us a very good program of work for the years to come, at least as an international organization.
Well, I think, Paul, we should do a to-do list. I'm going to turn to Adam now.
Thank you. I think one of the essays summed up my main feeling in the very first paragraphs when he was discussing why do we need this prize? Because it's both worrying and encouraging. Because it's worrying that we need to be able to force ethics into the financial industry, but it's also encouraging that there's so many young people willing to bring about that change. He then follows it up, as if reading my mind, about the penalties that we're seeing in the financial sector. Are they really making the difference on the ground that we're hoping that they are? ING were fined €900 million. I didn't close my bank account with them, and I investigated that for Euroclear. Deutsche Bank are in the press every week. I write a weekly blog about the news for compliance, and they're always there. They haven't lost any correspondent banking relationships because of that. So, as part of my discussions and to help process all this information, I did what all good boys should do. I called my mum. And my mum is amazing, but she knows nothing about finance. And it's really helpful to hear someone else's perspective on these topics that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And what really struck me from her discussion was that what we see as a positive from this increased regulatory action, we're seeing lots more fines, lots more investigations. That's a lot more negative news out there in the press. The general public are perceiving that as a bad thing. And that's really a clear message which is coming through in all the essays as well. We're seeing the young people are detecting problems, and we're wanting to solve the problems without seeing any real solutions happening now. I think one of the essays discussed really well the need for financial education. They also touched on the need for education, on the need from people coming from other sectors. Mathilde mentioned there from the fintech technology. But all of this embedding ethical education into the current curriculums, we're only going to see a benefit after a generation, when everyone's coming up through the ranks. I think what's really good about the quality of the essays and really the range of topics that are being covered is showing that there's already that desire, that hunger in our generation, and apologies, but I think I speak for the generation on the panel. There's the really need to drive that forward. I think you mentioned it as well in the opening statement. My generation, we're out on the streets. We're protesting climate change. We're speaking up and voting against MPs' expenses scandals. These are real, tangible ethical issues in the real world that we're acting against. And I think if we could find a way to really push that forward, there's a real benefit here to be gained. And two of the essays really covered that very well. There was one talking about the need for audit, for regular cultural audits. And I think that really is something we can implement now already to really force the big corporate infrastructures to make a change, because they'll be held accountable, it's very public, and it's against measurable parameters. The other one was the centralized ethical, I can't remember what he called it, ethical counter, basically, which having centralized information, which is public, is crucial for all kinds of fighting against financial crime. Particularly in my expertise, we're seeing the need for centralized KYC initiatives, and anything that really we can implement immediately onto what already exists and really pulls it into the public sphere is of immediate benefit. And as I said, it's worrying that we need to be discussing these things, but it's also encouraging that excellent ideas are coming out of this.
Thank you. I think it's very thought-provoking because indeed, at no point in time have we had three different generations as investors. We have the millennials, Generation X, and baby boomers, and they're all very, very different in the way they look at finance, the way they look at investment, they look at the world. And that's a challenge. When I talk to regulators, I say you should talk and include younger people. And I was at a panel last week on sustainable finance for insurance companies, and Gabriele Bernardino, the chair of IOPA, the European Insurance and Pension Authority, said, oh, that's a good idea. I will include young people in my user panels and get their opinion. So I think that is a first. So Pascal, I'm going to turn to you. What did you take up from these essays?
Thank you for inviting me. I saw first an imbalance. I mean, an imbalance between the part deserved and dedicated to techniques, digitalization, etc., or the way we finance economy, etc., versus ethics. So in that way, you young authors are not only young and different, but also representative of the industry in a way. So it's your profession or your way to survey the economy. You leave this ground, but you stay in this ground, and that was kind of a surprise. I could have expected a more balanced interest. And some essays are quasi only on techniques and just saying, in the end, there are ethical problems there and we should be more ethical. Okay, but it's a bit limited. Of course, my favorite essays were more balanced, but in this lot also there was a surprise because some, they think ethics will be solved by techniques, again. And I'm not sure. Maybe, but not totally sure. And could be the same thing as adding a box in the list of boxes to be ticked, you know. So, and then you had some, and fortunately numerous essays, more balanced, and concluding that this is intertwined. You cannot impose any ethics on any techniques and vice versa. And so you have to, by case, adapt your thinking to the context. And that is very ethical in itself, of course. And if there is a struggle between ethics and techniques, the winners are those losing the battleground, taking more in-depth approach and realizing that it's not ethics and techniques, it's more than that, it's transverse, it's relationship with others, you say other industries, other competencies, and also involving the regulator, I had to say that, of course, and in the end, as you said, Paul, culture. In the end, you have this culture imposing to you a lot of things, even when you are a very technical guy.
And you finished with the word culture, and culture. Interestingly enough, it's very wide. It's not narrow. It's diverse. It's learning from a multitude of sources, and doing some of the interviews this afternoon with some of the laureates, we discussed that, the young generation, for example, doesn't read enough literature. You take for granted, and my daughter is a prime example, you take for granted what Google tells you is absolutely right. And I actually proved to her that it was wrong. And so she really got frightened and said, oh, I'm not going to look at Google again. But, it's a two-dimensional world, not a three-dimensional world. And that is a challenge when you talk about ethics. Ilko, how can we bring this three-dimensional, multi-diverse world of ethics back into the finance industry?
Yes. So I feel very strongly about the need for, let's call it enlightened leadership. Typically, if people get appointed, people will check out their CVs and say, do they have the experience that is needed for the job? Do they have the educational background potentially? But what is missing is the test or looking for the evidence if somebody is versed in ethical decision making, i.e. understanding that there is an ethical topic, that there is a framework which can be applied, and that hopefully can guide, let's say, towards better solutions. Now, people in finance are typically not trained in ethics, and philosophers not necessarily know how a hedge fund looks like. At the same time, if we look at moral philosophy, this is not very esoteric. As some of the papers have shown, it's very possible to derive concrete guidelines for behavior that can be applied to recruiting, to appointment of people, etc., into positions. And as such, there's particularly one paper that is in there that I liked very, very much, which I think was applicable in terms of qualities for appointees. So I think leadership is something that needs to be looked at again, that needs to be redefined. We need to evidence ethical skill, and that these people that are being put in positions then can lead by example and show what is accepted behavior and what is behavior which also gets rewarded and what is it that's not. So this would be my kind of plea that I feel passionate about, that we need to look at leadership and all the bodies involved in appointing leaders, be it regulators, be it supervisory bodies, etc., will need to stretch, let's say, beyond the regular criteria and get to know the models which are out there, which we can apply out of ethics into leadership in finance.
Yeah, leadership is leading by example. And when Pascal, you look at the human factor of compliance and you want to prevent risks, the leader has to lead. But then how does it go through into middle management and into the, let's say, the junior entrants? How can you make that flow right from the top to the bottom or from bottom back up to the top?
Not doing this, I'm not convinced it has to follow this path. You have to speak to the people at the bottom of the company as well as you speak to the leaders. From my experience, your main allies in ethics are not necessarily the leaders. But it's more complicated, of course, to mobilize all the staff. It's more complicated, but it's the kind of false excuse you have always in ethics. It's too complicated. Yes, it's very complicated. It takes more time, but it's very powerful. I think in this house, we can say inclusiveness is very important, So you don't include people following this path from the very top of the company, then the senior managers, then the managers, and then the staff. You lose a lot of information at each level. So you have to treat each level. They have not the same needs, not the same impact, positive or negative. And so you have to have an adapted approach to each level. And if people, they realize they are heard, they are interesting for you, they will help you. If they are just the tool of the manager who is responding to the exemplarity or to the orders of the senior managers, it's not the same. So the difference is, in one case, you duplicate conformity, compliance in English, you duplicate compliance to ethics. That means that, in a way, it's to be compliant to the tone from the top. But to be compliant to the tone from the top is not to be an actor. And if you want to have allies, they have to be actors, not only obeying people to the tone from the top. The term is echo from the bottom. But the echo, I don't totally like the idea, because the idea of the echo from the bottom is the echo from the tone from the top. So
And
think
I
it's-
would say the younger generation is really not responding to this paternalistic directional approach. I remember when I started my career in finance, I would be extremely polite and almost bow before my CEO. Well, now that is gone. So there's also this perception of flattening of structures. You do need leadership, but it is in a different way. At CFA Institute, we call it servant leadership, so putting it the other way around. And I think that was quite a learning curve for me, coming from more traditional kind of companies. So I'm going to turn to the new generation, because you're the youngest of us on this panel, and see, what do you think about this?
I think it's a really excuse me. I think it's a really interesting conflict. We see actually from someone who writes policies internally for the bank, which is to help people act in a way that we are considered to be ethical, the way that we want the bank to operate. I also see it from a perspective of my generation. We don't, as you say, like to be told what to do. And it was also echoed in some of the essays that were saying that less regulation is actually the way forward. We should allow people to operate more freely within their own ethical boundaries, make their own decisions, and not be told what to do. Because being told what to do creates that need to tick the box or to find another way of doing it, which is more in line with your own perception, which is not in line with the policy. So I myself, I don't know what the happy middle ground is between regulation and tone at the top and setting these rules and policies and letting the staff run free and form their own ethical environment. It's a very difficult line to draw.
I would say the added difficulty you have is that organizations don't have one culture, because they are formed of an amalgam as they grew in size. So a big banking group will be composed of an investment bank, of an insurance company, of a postal bank, of online banking model, etc., all with very different approaches and very different cultures. And I think that was at the issue of the LIBOR scandals. And I remember, Paul, there was this wonderful essay from some of the prize winners in the two awards back. But I think that really has something to do with it. At the OECD, you're working on looking at sort of due diligence procedures. How is that impact? You know, when you look at all these, you have to look at the different cultures. Pascal says you have to approach not just top to bottom, not sort of linear, but sideways. How can you apply a due diligence structure in that?
Well, at the OECD, yes, we work on what we call responsible business conduct, and we have developed a series of due diligence guidance for different sectors of industry. And very interesting for this prize and for what we are talking about today, we have now two diligence guidance for the finance industry, one targeting institutional investors, and the second one, which is very recent, targeting lending operations and underwriting transactions. So the idea is to work with a specific industry, and in this case, like the actors in the big banks, you know, and also the stakeholders involved, and to figure out, to help them on how to do proper due diligence. And there are some steps, you know, in each process of due diligence, and what are the challenges, what are the techniques, the steps that you should put in place, and also what are the regulations that might impair or help you in your due diligence process. So I don't know if I'm answering your questions here.
Yeah, I think I want you to, you know, the process, because it's not one target. It's multi-targeted, because there are different concerns in a due diligence process as to where you find yourself in the organization. So how can you address that when you structure a due diligence process?
I mean, you you need to have a risk-based approach to need to see whether in your investment or in your lending operations, what are the risks that the people you lend money to, whether they have a mostly environmental risk, for example, or social one or whatever. So it's always a risk-based approach. So there is not like a very strict, you should do this or that, but you should think about what are your risks. You should embed your policy within your process and your management system. Then you need to identify the risk. Then you need to seize or prevent the risk. Then you need to track implementation of your due diligence, then communicate about the results, etc., mitigate if necessary. So these are more like standard steps that need to be adjusted to what specific risk you're looking at, depending on the operation, the specific operation.
And I think, of course, bearing in mind that finance is moving big way into sustainability and sustainable finance, very difficult to figure out exactly what the risk assessment will be, how to structure it. And also, I would say, I've seen in the preceding 10 years the upcoming of impact assessments on regulations, impact assessments on what that regulation can impact assessments on anything basically. But I think what is interesting is it's difficult to qualify and to quantify an impact assessment. And I remember a lot of discussions about that. So I think we are building processes, but are we sure that we're actually getting there? And I think that comes then into our next point, which is about the new world of fintech, the new world of non-bank finance growing, the upcoming of private markets, again, public markets. We're moving into, at the same time, very large possibilities. Big data is an enabler, but at the same time, challenges. So, and it almost, to someone who's not at all tech-minded, but just from the outside, it seems as if we're having a huge world, but we're getting narrower and narrower, and we need to both take into account the very small human aspect to the very large capacity where we have enormous amounts of data, information, we can buy wherever we want, etc. Ilko, what do you see there?
So this is particularly complex, and there are a few dominant models out there yet. This is all very much in flux. It is what you say. It is about the detail and about the complex large systems out there. And if I bring it back to ethics, what I sometimes wonder is that in the design of these structures, and we talk about ethics in data science and so on, in the design of these structures, is there consideration for interest at stake? Is there consideration for people affected? And in my humble opinion, and I've seen some of the blockchain projects, there's not enough of it, enough consideration, which means that as you build those structures which sort of need to tackle issues on the detailed level, but also answer this quest for the larger calling, be it sustainability and so on, some of those platforms potentially are set up to fail because people will not be able to trust those technologies, given that those considerations did not move enough into the design of things. Now, many times fintechs are there's this beautiful ambition in there. There are young graduates, computer science graduates that want to change the world. I would plea, of course, with that young energy to also get some reflective capabilities on board, so that the design of these kind of things is done such that it earns the trust sort of automatically of people.
Adam, you're clear, you're really, you have huge capacity clearing. You are probably looking at blockchain technology every day, and the risks and the benefits. What is your take on this?
Well, indeed, Euroclear has some projects ongoing. I'm not directly involved. However, not sticking with the blockchain, but going to fintech generally, has the potential to be very disruptive, not necessarily in a negative sense. Fintechs are popping up all over, be it for financial products or even aid to existing products and processes. Particularly in my sector of KYC, we're seeing fintechs popping up to automate email sending, make things much easier to reduce the human administrative burden. But also, as we discussed before, the centralizing of all that data. And data is a big point in the fintech. And when we were discussing with some fintechs and startups at industry events, you see that they have excellent ideas for the financial services, but not necessarily the compliance mindset. They're not aware that they have to have an AMLRO, a money laundering reporting officer. They're not aware that they have to have a data protection officer. And it's this excellent ideas and innovation coupled together with a very difficult compliance framework. It makes it a difficult environment for fintechs, but it's also, there's a lot of opportunities out there. There's a big need to have these new innovative systems come around to encourage the big banks, who are traditionally very slow moving, to innovate and adapt and change their processes. So again, I see it as both a good and a bad.
So Pascal, at the Banque de France, that venerable institution, 100 years ago, a traditional bank, was the pater familias, and making sure that you were trustworthy, and it was a sort of very slow process. I'll never forget, and I'm going to be very girly here, I'll never forget Mary Poppins, the film from the 60s, where they go to the bank and they see all these old gentlemen, and it's all very serious, and I used to think banks were like that until I worked in one. But it has changed, and you have all these new entrants. You have Alibaba partnering with a bank in the UK. You have Libra coming along. You have all these changes, and so it must be difficult for a central bank, a regulator and a supervisor to actually understand or see or this sort of amoeba like structure in financial services.
Yes, but it's difficult for them to understand what is finance also, and what is money, for example. And so that's our work also, to understand where they want to go, and when they speak about finance and money, if they are wrong or if they miss something, to help or to stop, to learn. So it's more complicated. It's not only they know, we don't. They are the future and we are the past. It's a bit more complicated. And for example, the governor said several times that the cryptocurrencies are not currencies. There is a definition of a currency, and you have to be able to do something with the money. And a currency is not defined by who is interested in creating a new currency and creating risks for everybody. So it's not that we are resisting change, that you have to label correctly what you say. So yes, it's difficult for central banks. A lot of people is working on this. We have digital guys, of course. We work with fintechs, blockchains, etc. So just to be in the mood, in the same wave. But cautious. As a central bank, you're always cautious. Libra is a very good example of this. Maybe they were out of their depth. Maybe we will see. So it's in a way it's dangerous also, and so we have to be very, very cautious. So it's, as you said, also the same, very difficult line between we don't want to be the ones stopping innovation, but we are paid also to avoid risks that nobody understands.
Yeah, and I think indeed this is, I've taken part in some of the discussions at the EU level on fintech and on crowdfunding, for example. the Commission looked at it for several years before saying, well, we should actually do something about it now. Because it's true, you want to stimulate. We know that financial markets have had enormous difficulties, and continental Europe has problems in connecting capital markets to the banking market. But I think, Mathilde, because the OECD is beyond Europe, you're working globally. How do you see all these different initiatives? You have initiatives at the OECD, at the EU. You have initiatives at the FSB, at the G20. Are we connecting dots, or are we just all talking separately? What are we doing?
We are connecting the dots, and we are cooperating a lot across all these, initiatives, as you say. And let me give you an example on blockchain, for example, because you mentioned that we have launched like 18 months ago a big forum on blockchain, and where what we're trying to do is really to bring together the industry and the regulators and the policymakers. They do not speak the same language, that's for sure. And we are both, the regulators, the policymakers are trying to figure out what the industry is doing, and the industry is trying to understand what are the problems that the policymakers are trying to solve. So it's really an exchange to ensure that the policymakers understand what's going on in the industry and can play their role. And to do so, for example, we were discussing this afternoon that the European Commission has also a forum and is launching an initiative on blockchain, etc. And we might partner, become such a partner, so that we will have, because on many topics we work a lot with the European Commission. On many topics also we use the G20. We serve the G20 to give them some background papers on issues that are the priorities for the presidencies of the G20, and we serve them and we use them somehow to give more visibility to some of the work that we do. On the FSB, of course, we are represented in the FSB, and we work a lot, our Committee on Financial Market, to develop papers and reflections and policy proposals that could be taken at the FSB level afterwards, etc. So all these institutions have specific focus, specific governance, specific coverage in terms of geography, but we work together. Yeah.
But you have to find a common language.
Yes, but we do find common language.
That's encouraging.
Yes, absolutely.
It's very encouraging.
Absolutely.
That's very good. So I know Paul is going to look at me and say we have to finish, and I hate to do that. Once I have a microphone and a panel, I love discussing. Okay, no, but I have an exercise here. Now, I have not told my panelists this, but I think they're well able to respond impromptu to things. I would like you to give me 3 action points and to say who these action points are for. So pick your stakeholder, pick your action points. So let's start with Ilko.
So I have the shortest time to think. 3 action items for ethics. I think that the enforcement of ethics should be much stronger, and we should leave, let's say, the state of having codes of conduct, and that could be for leaders and for regulators. Number 1. Number 2, when recruiting, ask for evidenced ethics. What was your dilemma? What was the situation? What did you do? What was the thinking, etc.? So you can ask for evidence. Number 3, it all sounds so serious. I was thinking, also enjoy the ride, right? Have fun as you design, finance anew. There's lots of opportunities, and I think we should also, enjoy ourselves as we are designing the new infrastructure of finance and the new purpose of finance, especially towards, maybe it comes a little bit late in the discussion, but towards supporting the Sustainable Development Goals. Lots going on there, lots of professional pride to be had.
I think that last point was incredibly important. I mean, the first 2 as well, but the last point, because I remember at the launch, ceremony, there was a discussion, and afterwards a banker came to me and said, "But we've been doing mea culpa for the last 10 years. Am I still going to have to wear a hair shirt?" You know, they're fed up. And I can understand at a certain point you want to enjoy. And I think why did sustainable finance catch on so quickly is because it's something really positive. And it's something to have, indeed, as you say, to put your professional pride and to feel I'm doing something worthwhile. And I think it's always good when you say action points and when you say things, to say them in a positive way. So I think that's a really very valuable point. You see, you had the shortest, but you came up with it. Ah, Mathilde, now.
It's difficult because the list is long. Let me pick up three. Okay. So I will pick up maybe, I don't know. Okay, let's begin at the compliance level. It's maybe not the most sexy thing, but still there is so much to do in terms of enforcement and implementation. So that's clear. Then if we go to the culture level, oh yeah, comply. It's for, okay, let's say for supervisors, you know, and internal auditors. Let's put it this way. Okay, there's a lot to do in terms of enforcement implementation. Then, if we think about the culture, this famous toxic culture, I think there's something nobody has mentioned here, and that's for me, I think, very important. Is whatever the process, the systems you put in place, in whatever type of organization, at one point it will be up to the individual to have the courage to speak up and to stand the ground on ethical grounds, you know. So within an organization, you need to make sure that you hire and you cultivate people who are courageous enough to do so. So that's not easy, that's not obvious.
That's an incredibly important as
That's
well.
incredibly important. And there is one system that is important to allow these people to have an impact, is to have a whistleblower protection system that is decent enough. And that's not also easy. So that would be my second priority. And the third one would be sustainable finance as yours, because I think it's a positive agenda, especially for the young generation. You know, okay, we can look at the past, at all the scandals, etc., but the positive agenda is to how finance can impact the world in terms of environment, inclusiveness, etc. So sustainable finance, there is a lot to do here.
Again, your second point is a really a key one as well. The support mechanism is so important. And sometimes it's not just the support mechanism within the organization, but having a way out to discuss. So at CFA, the CFA charter holders are formed in societies in different countries, and they have an opportunity to talk to friends and people within the society and just get support that way. And I think having people outside the organization where you work can help enormously. Mentoring. I mentor women who have finished Masters of Finance from Cambridge University. And I have a lot of stories about them finding it quite difficult and challenging in their careers. Also, we haven't spoken much about diversity, how diversity can help the more diverse teams are. You know, that is something of an issue. But really incredible points. So lovely, thank you. Now I'm going to turn to Adam.
I want to echo Elko's comments there, but also use a Euroclear term and take a helicopter view and say that I think it's not just education, it's awareness. It's also communication and enforcement. Everyone has to be aware of what the ethical issues are, that raising, well, to use the term again, awareness across all employees and all levels of management, I think is crucial. Communication, as Mathilde said, you need the Speak Up hotline. People have to be able to feel that they can talk about it freely without recourse. And enforcement, there has to be some kind of backing up and encouragement to follow these practices. And I think that's where the regulators come in, and maybe not with more regulation, but with more active participation.
More dialogue. Pascal.
So the first point would be inclusiveness, total inclusiveness. I mean, everybody has to be competent in ethics. Depending on your level, the training will be different, of course, in scope, but also in depth. It's your first prevention means. I mean, because they will speak, because I will see and understand, but also because if everybody has this culture, those who want to go a bit too further, there will be a pressure group. No need to whistleblow if you have all the staff on the same mood. So the exceptions, because there are exceptions, they will be recognized more quickly. I mean, because for me, in our job as ethics officer, the first objective is the staff, not the ones not respecting the rules, which are who are not so numerous. So inclusiveness is not just a word; it's very important. In a way, it's not like saying, "Okay, I am going to give training for this group in German because they need German." But everybody knows ethical dilemmas, and everybody needs to be competent in ethics because ethics is everyday life, not only business life. So you cannot go and say it's too expensive, it's too etc. etc. No, everybody from the beginning and regularly also. Second point, I think, it's like I think ethics should claim to be as important as law, HR, finance, IT, etc. That means that when you build any project, when you take any decision in a company, the ethics officer must be involved. Because you don't know if ethics will be involved if you don't have an ethics officer. When I was in HR, I had discussions with the manager saying, I need a psychologist, okay? And you are competent to say when you need a psychologist? No. So we need internally psychologists to be able to say, there you need one. In that case, no, because sometimes you want psychologists for false reason. You don't want to take decisions, etc. So the same for ethics officers. You need to be at the stage where ethics officers are in the executive committee. I mean, it's a minimum, even if they don't need to be there sometimes. But who knows? And for me, the third one is the key one. We must have the means to be really independent. Independent. It means that, for example, we don't rely on the decision of the CEO when we have an advice, or we don't fear retaliation from the CEO or the audit department or the HR department when we give advice to a department. So that means we don't depend on the internal audit. We should depend on external audit. For example, recently, the European Court of Auditors has audited the ethics system of the institutions. Yes, but it's not the internal audit of the Commission. It's not internally in the Parliament. It's outside. The European Court of Auditors is really external. So I think it's really key. And just to give an example, the High Authority for Transparency of the Public Life in France has released a guide, a book, I would say for us, for the public ethics officers, and they say that the boss of the administrations and public organizations should write that they commit not to give instructions to the ethics officers. That's really key for me.
So, Paul, you have now had the most fantastic list of actions, which I hope we're going to be public about, because I think all of them have been really rather wonderful. Please join me in applauding this panel. Thank you so much.
A few weeks ago, in another setting, we started with young people, with students, to discuss finance and ethical issues using films. And one of the films that came up, and it's to link to the end of the conversation in the roundtable, was a film of 1946 of Frank Capra, It's a Wonderful Life. And the seminar was, title was How to Make Finance Happy Again. So I thought some of the tones coming back here, and I really recommend you to have a look at this film, which is a wonderful way of presenting financial serenity. So maybe it's not gone forever, and I think some of the elements that we have read in the essays, but we have also listened to during this roundtable are around, and I think they have to be enhanced and they have to be stressed, and not only critic but also forward-looking activity of the prize winners. And we turn now to the nervous part of the ceremony, because we are going to call some of the authors to the stage. So therefore, Gesina, Kamerlingh, and myself, in our quality of co-presidents of the jury, we are happy to call Mr. Andrea Bancone on the stage. He wrote a very... So, Mr. Bancone is Italian. You are a global custody analyst at Euroclear Bank in Brussels, and you wrote a piece, very interesting piece, that received the special commandment of the jury, and the paper title is Moralization of Contract in Islamic Perspective. So, Gesina, if you could come. Also, so here is your diploma. Congratulations. We are very happy. Congratulations. Congratulations, and you have a few minutes to tell us what is in the paper and what is your main concern that you carry to the readers and to the public of the prize. Sure. Thank you very much.
Okay, first of all, thank you for having me here today. It was a great pleasure to participate in this contest. So the reason why I decided to investigate on Islamic finance is basically because during the 2008 crisis, mainly all of the Islamic finance institutions were not impacted at systemic level by the collapse of the global economy. And basically, Islamic finance professionals thought that this was a proof that their model was better than conventional finance. And so for me, it was important to investigate why this was the case, and what could be the possible weaknesses in this model. Basically, this is a model that is very much interpretive. So each Islamic finance institution has to appoint a Sharia board, so a board of people who are experts in Sharia and religious laws. And basically, one of the few items I would like people to take away from my essay is one major critiques that Islamic finance professionals make to conventional finance, which is the practice of risk transfer. So basically, conventional finance institutions transfer their risk to other parties until there is no more chance, and the ultimate party will be the public citizens. And so public funds will be needed to recover the wrongdoings of conventional finance and lending institutions. Now, the fact that Islamic finance institutions are very much dependent on interpretive nature of the laws of the Sharia makes it something not to be fully trusted for, because once a change in an interpretation will occur, then this may have consequences in the contracts that are provided in a financial contract. So that's one thing I would like people to look at, and then for more details, perhaps I encourage you to read my.
So we are moving closer to the top. I would like to call on Mr. Matteo Scooch from Poland. Mr. Kuch was already on the podium a few months ago of the Polish Prize, and his essays was translated and put in the jury process at the later stage of selection. And you wrote an essay that is how to shape moral attitudes in banking, the Polish example. And you won the second prize. And we are happy to present you this cover. Maybe, yes. So, congratulations, and you have a possibility to share some of your conclusions and elements of analysis.
So once again, thank you for organizing this event, this contest, and to introducing more and more ethics to the finance world. I think is one of the most important things we need to do in the modern world. So thank you. I need to thank you, the Polish Bank Association, for organizing the Polish part of the event, and to put in a few words, my inspiration to write my essay was, I think, twofold. One part is that I teach ethics in academia for 10 years, and I'm really involved with how we can bring out the moral attitude in people. What can we do to create the space when they can act more morally, or where we build moral awareness of the situation we come in, because as it was said in the panel, it's everyday situation, everyday and also work situation, and then we meet moral dilemmas. And the other part is that my PhD was about ethical dilemmas in neoliberal theory, mostly focused on Milton Friedman. So I had like kind of diagnosed the problem, and I was wondering what can we do to change it. Where's the space that we can provide the real change? And what I find out, and what my experience told me, is that one thing is that regulations don't work. They are necessary. We need to have them, but they cannot guarantee us the moral attitudes. That's not, because that's the part of the problem that often when we impose regulations, we believe that they will solve the problem. That's not the case. They can help, but they never guarantee that we solve the problems. The other part is incentives. It also seems good to have incentives, and they are necessary, but they also don't guarantee us solving the moral problems. So what I believe we need to do is, it was also said in the panel, so I just skip the parts that were already said, but we need to work with the people on each level, and each level of engagement, each position that we work for need different kind of moral attitudes and we meet different moral dilemmas. So my solution, or my looking for a solution, was in virtue ethics and what Aristotle defines as practical wisdom. That's the wisdom we derive from praxis, from practicing our work, for example. And what's important is something that nobody can teach us from the textbook or from the regulation. That's something we need to experience. And the most important thing is to create space for people to experience that. So to have space to speak out, to have guarantee that I can act morally as I feel I should. And I have space to do it. And that's one of the most important things we can do. And just to finish, because I wrote my essays 2 years ago, and I feel I kind of move forward from that. I think another action point that's important, I think, is it's on the bound. I think it's a little bit psychological one, but how we can develop environment when people could switch their thinking from instrumental rationality to ethics, because they already living in this sort of instrumental rationality environment, and we need to create space for them to be moral, and it's not trivial dilemma. That's a very important thing we need to do. Thank you.
So after the second prize comes first ex aequo prize, and I call on Mrs. Marta Rocchi on the stage. She is teaching corporate governance and business ethics at DCU Business School in Ireland, and she wrote a paper about techno-moral financial agents. That's for why I received this first ex aequo prize. So, congratulations. Here is the diploma. So, it's open to you.
Yes, thank you. So first of all, I would like to thank the Observatoire de la Finance for organizing the Ethics and Trusts in Finance Global Prize. I was telling Professor Dembisky before that this is a prize that is very well known and famous among scholars who are actually dedicating their work to ethics and finance. And I also want to thank Virgile and Anne that were with us in this month to organize this, and Gesina to interviewing us and to introducing and moderating this very interesting panel. So it's an honor to receive this first prize for this article. The idea is that when we write about ethics and finance, there's a lot of people who are interested in ethics and finance, but in the end, the question is, what is ethics? What is really ethics? So that's, in a way, the question that I ask in this essay, and I say, why don't we distinguish the different approaches that we have been experienced during the history of ideas about what is ethics? And why don't we try to understand what's the best ethical approach that can help us in facing the new disruptive innovation in finance that we have, which is fintech. So the real question of the essay is, which is the the approach par excellence that we can apply to fintech now? So the answer is in the article, no, but I will spoil it a bit. The answer is that we have been experiencing at least two different approaches in ethics in general and also in the ethics of finance. So an approach that is more centered on the actions and an approach that is more centered on the agent. So what I suggest is to use this agent-centered approach to ethics, which is in a way to rediscover ancient ethics, so the ethics of Aristotle, to solve the new dilemmas of the digital world and of fintech. So in a way, this virtue ethics approach looks at the agents in their narrative unity. So we can't take a finance professional in isolation. We should consider that this is a person, and this person has a family, has friends. So the idea is that why don't we take into account the life of this person as a whole, and we try to understand how can we help this person growing, not just as a finance professional, but also as a good person. So the idea is to suggest to look at two virtues. One was already mentioned before, so it's practical wisdom, because the idea is that now we are in this age that is called the fourth industrial revolution. We are in a world where we have many possibilities. So our challenge is to be more human, is to understand the specificity of our being human. And so practical wisdom help us identify the good end to pursue, because when you can do almost everything, the interesting point is to understand what is really worth doing, what is the best thing to do. So the idea is that to apply this paradigm of the virtue and of the techno-moral wisdom to the agents that are going to work in fintech. And in this way, actually, I really hope that we can help finance really to contribute to the good of society. When is the challenge there? Because I saw that, so Professor Dembski will go back home with more work because of all these action points. So I will add one as well. So if I can take the liberty to do that. So the idea is that to work towards actually making in a way that education will keep the pace of the innovation. So how is that possible? That we still run Masters of Finance or Master of Financial Innovation without an ethics curricula, for example, or an ethics module, for example. So I think this is something that we should try to implement in any business school of the world. I work in a business school, so I meet students that are studying finance, I teach ethics in finance, but I think it's important that we kind of try to make this for everyone, especially because this will mean also that all these people will be more sensible to make this innovation for everyone. They should be inclusive, because when we talk about this, are we talking just about our world, or are we really having a global perspective? So that's my wish for finance. And I take the opportunity also for, given that we're in the narrative unity of life of virtue ethics, to thank my husband who is here, because I write on the virtues, but in the family there's a need of someone who needs to grow in the virtue. Why? And so thank you very much to the Observatoire, and thank you very much to you for hosting the prize, and it's an honor to receive this. Thanks.
So, first ex aequo prize, and now I call on the other part of the first prize, which is the ex aequo prize, the paper written by two brothers, one coming from the ethical perspective, the other one probably from more technological perspective. Luca Roncella and Andrea Roncella. Luca is associate researcher at Boston Consulting Group in Madrid, and Andrea is PhD student at the School of Economics and Business at University of Navarra, also in Spain. I told you that we work totally anonymously. So you see, this year we have really an Italian presence, which is overwhelming, with one Polish accent, but it's the first time that such a concentration, geographic concentration, appears on the stage of these prizes. So we have two diplomas for you.
Oh, thank you. It's fair.
So
I'm Luca.
Luca, yes? So maybe you can come here in the middle.
Middle?
Yes, okay. So congratulations, and I know how you managed to.
Yeah, I'm the younger one, so
You're the younger one. Okay. So
I have
it's
this,
in the name of youth. Yes.
yes,
Yes. Go.
yes, indeed. I've prepared some words just to be sure not to make any error. Thank you, Professor Dembski. Thank you, Dr. Kamerlingh, and thank you, everybody, to invite us here, and thank you to OECD. This is an honor to be here, really. So in the afterwards of the 2008 financial crisis, there has been a greater effort to include the teaching of ethics and in the curriculum of business schools and in the financial certifications. However, we saw that there is a risk in the current debate on finance and ethics that is missing a key point, which is in the technology and in the innovation inside finance. Which is the problem? Because of the people at the center of those process are increasingly financial engineering and quants with very good computational and quantitative skills, but no clue about ethical dimension of economics and finance. So we analyzed, we saw that this is a clear problem for our society and for the financial world across all the dimensions. So just to summarize, which we think are the roadmap, which is the roadmap for an ethical financial engineering, we summarize 3 ideas, just to give you the really key points so you can go home with some ideas. So the first is rethinking the financial engineering education in the university, in the centers of research, and through the lens of virtuous ethics, and leveraging in particular the practical wisdom. Here we heard a lot about this topic today, so clearly it's the most important aspect that today the finance had to solve. The second point that we saw is involving more the universities and the academic centers of research in the development of financial innovations, which is right now in the hands of the research units of the financial institutions. And we think that this process had to change, and that the university and the cultural society and institutions had to enter in this financial innovation. And lastly, we think that we need to adopt best practices and standards of conduct in the financial engineering, like we do for financial advisors. In our paper, we saw that for MBAs or in the CFA, the ethics part is one of the biggest and most important parts of this education. So we think that also in the education of financial engineering, therefore in the masters of financial engineering, in the CQF, the Certificate of Quantitative Finance, the ethics need to be a central part of the curriculum of the students. So in conclusion, the same interdisciplinary approach that is featuring the other technical subjects, such as neuroscience, should be adopted even in the financial innovation process. The hope is to have financial engineers who are bilinguals. That is the bridge to gap ethical and technical knowledge. Thank you.
So that's for the ceremonial part. Two remarks. One, you have seen probably that Aristotle is back in the age of fintech, but he has still something to say, and especially he has a lot of interpreters, and that's the first thing. The second thing, which I did not mention in the beginning, that the winners of the prize have shared together the amount of $20,000, so which is substantial, and I hope that each of you will use it in order to put forward a little bit of the research, even the prize is, and there is no formal commitment in it. So thank you very much for being here, and I turn now to Mr. Andrzej Guria, who just arrived. Thank you very much for being here, for hosting us here. Mr. Andrzej Guria is Secretary General of OECD, and we are looking forward for your keynote speech. Thank you very much.
Dear friends, welcome to the OECD and welcome to the award ceremony of the 7th edition of the Ethics and Trust in Finance Global Prize. Let me congratulate the finalists and the prize winners for their groundbreaking work, their efforts in promoting ethics, responsibility, and trust in the world of finance. It's an honor to host this event with such inspiring participants on such a relevant topic. Public trust in the financial sector is crucial for market economies, but also for social progress. Unfortunately, more than 10 years after the crisis, in spite of significant reforms, trust in financial institutions remains relatively low. Actually, people trust the financial sector institutions only 57%, so slightly more than half. Now, you will think that that is a very low number, except people only trust their government by 43%, so that should make the financiers look good. This has to change. Financial markets are the nervous systems of our economies. They are key in ensuring the efficient allocation of capital. They are the primary intermediate between investors and economic actors. And as such, public trust in finance and in financial institutions plays a vital role in transforming savings into investments and economic growth. This is a delicate moment. The institutions are going through deep transformations, and so is the global economy. We're actually going through a slow growth period, slowing down from 4% to now below 3%. And perhaps if people take some more of the wrong decisions, then this could get even worse. And we're going to need those ideas, those initiatives, that research that we saw here, the proposals that you have put forward, driven by this Ethics and Trust in Finance Prize. Now, promoting ethics and trust in finance is at the heart of our own OECD work. We're advancing in many parallel tracks. We're working on automatic exchange of information for tax purposes. That is boosting transparency and communication between banks and governments, but it's also a very important element of trust, because people have to know that by the end of September 2019, only a few days ago, 50 million bank accounts worth 5 trillion euros had been exchanged, and close to 100 billion of additional tax revenues have been identified. So the global banking system is no longer a place to hide money. There is nowhere to hide. That is crucial in terms of getting the trust back. Our work to improve corporate governance through the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance is also providing globally recognized standards on transparency, accountability, business integrity, including in the financial sector. Our work on the fight against bribery through the OECD Anti-Bribery Convention, where 44 countries have signed and are practicing and are making sure that their own companies do not attempt to bribe officials in third countries in the pursuit of contracts of profit. We also are working on promoting responsible business conduct through our OECD guidelines for multinational enterprises. In October 2019, just literally a few days ago, the OECD released guidance for responsible business conduct in general corporate lending and underwriting transactions. Not a very sexy title. It's a very long title, but it basically is about what the title says: responsible business conduct in corporate lending and underwriting transactions. It sets out the first broadly recognized environmental and social standards for corporate lending and underwriting transactions. It was developed in close consultation with leading global banks, and it was approved by 48 governments. We just launched Trust in Business. This is an initiative which brings public and private sector leaders together precisely to see if we can get back the trust that we lost. You know, we had a lot of legacies from the crisis. We a lot of victims, growth, jobs, the question of equality, inequality, but then because of all of the above, the question of trust or the loss of trust, the destruction of trust. And finally, we're working hard to help countries turn their financial systems into tools to promote more sustainable growth and fight climate change. We recently created the Center on Green Finance and Investment. We created the Business for Inclusive Growth platform. This is 40 companies, some of the largest companies in the world, with 3 million employees and upwards of $1 trillion in sales. And they all pledged to promote and practice inclusive growth in a number of areas. Some of the more obvious, like, you know, human rights, and then very practical, very specific areas about the workplace, and then they also confirmed this commitment in the G7 and in the Paris Peace Forum that we had last week. You can see the culture changing gradually because you get involved with consumers, and then consumers are rewarding the companies that actually do these things, do them properly, and then communicate them properly. That's the other part of the problem, communicating. And they will punish the ones that do not. So it's going to become a business question, a practical business question, part of the competition. We're also helping governments design better policies to deepen and expand digital financial literacy, financial inclusion. Now, dear friends, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who is, by the way, honorary member of the jury of this prize, he said, ethics matter. Ethics matters first because whether it is a huge transaction or a retail deposit, ethics creates trust. And without trust, finance congeals. It congeals in the arteries of the economy, and that causes a collapse. So I want to congratulate you all, both for the initiative, for the work, for getting together, for bringing these young men and women and acknowledging their talent and their contributions, but also for sharing this concern. We have to get the trust back. And each one of your ideas, each one of your initiatives is going to help us do exactly that. Remember the motto of the OECD, better policies for better lives. That, of course, has to have a bit of a crown, which is about the ethics of how we do this. Thank you very much.
Just a warm word of thank you to Secretary General for his time, for his reflection, for opening the agenda of the OECD to make it closer to the young researchers and young professionals, to showing also them that there is a room somewhere, there is a space to bring their ideas and to bring these ideas to fruition somewhere with the help of the Observatoire or maybe without it. And I think this agenda is showing that there is ethics, trust, and there is a third world which was present all across the ceremony, there is a hope. There is a hope for a good finance, and there is a hope for a good world. Thank you very much. And then we have a session of pictures with Secretary General